Marianne Beckmeyer was born on June 3, 1950, in the town of Sarstedt, district of Hildesheim in Lower Saxony, Germany. She spent all her youth in Sarstedt, a city that was chosen by her parents after they fled East Prussia that had been annexed by the Soviet Union in 1945. Her childhood was marked by difficulties and emotional trauma. Her parents were extremely authoritarian and lived under a moral and fundamentalist regime. As a child, her parents separated and her mother remarried. At 16, Marianne became pregnant for the first time, and 2 years later, at 18, she gave birth to her second daughter. However, her children were put up for adoption shortly after they were born, as Marianne didn't have enough resources to raise them. She was also abused shortly before giving birth to her second child, which certainly contributed to her youthful trauma and a life full of instabilities. In 1973, at 23 years old, Marianne had her third child, a girl she named Anna Beckmeyer. Shortly after giving birth, she was submitted by the government to have surgery to have no more children, as it was her third pregnancy. This practice was very common in the country at that time to control population growth. Marianne was a single mother. She lived alone with her daughter and worked as a bartender to support the household. According to reports, Anna was always a happy and lively child. On May 5, 1980, when Anna was 7 years old, there was a small argument between them. The two exchanged a few words, and Anna decided not to go to school. She would detour and go to a house of friends. However, she never arrived at the friend's house, as she was kidnapped by Klaus Grabowski, a 35-year-old butcher who lived in the neighborhood. Klaus had already been convicted and served time for the crime of abuse against 2 girls. He was released from detention after undergoing a chemical castration process in 1976 of his own volition. It was a common process at the time for those convicted of crimes of this nature in the country. The justice then reduced his sentence and released him, believing that he was no longer a danger to society. They just didn't count that 2 years after being released, Klaus would start a love relationship and then decided to undergo a hormonal treatment that made him return to his previous state, reversing his castration. Klaus kept Anna trapped in his house for several hours. It is not known for sure, but it is likely that he had sexual relations with her, and then he decided to take her life, suffocating her. According to the prosecutor in charge of the case, after taking Anna's life, Klaus tied her body tightly, placed it inside a cardboard box, and buried it on the bank of a river in a shallow grave. He was arrested the same night he committed the crime, after being denounced by his own fiancée. To the police, he confessed to being responsible for the crime against Anna, but denied that he had abused her. According to his version, Anna would have tried to blackmail him, asking for money and threatened to tell people what he had done to her if he didn't give in to her demands. He then, afraid of going back to prison, would have decided to take the girl's life. Marianne, who was already heartbroken and having lost her daughter, was infuriated by the criminal's allegations. According to her, in addition to taking her daughter's life, he was trying to tarnish the girl's honor with those absurd stories. After all, accusing a 7-year-old of extortion claiming self-defense can't be taken seriously. Klaus was put on trial in Germany by the Lübeck District Court. The trial lasted several days, and due to the repercussions of the case, the place was packed in all sessions. Klaus' decision to reverse his castration was immensely discussed in the media. According to them, it was unacceptable that someone with his background could have access to such treatment, which nullifies the sense that he was released from prison before serving his entire sentence. In his testimonies during the trial, Klaus stated all the time that he had no intention of abusing Anna. He and his lawyers kept claiming that the girl had blackmailed him and wanted to receive money in return, and if he didn't give it in, she would hand him over. This was the central basis of his entire line of defense, which also relied on allegations that he acted out of hormonal imbalance caused by the hormone therapy he received after being voluntarily castrated while in jail. Forensics investigators worked for a long time to determine whether or not Anna was abused, but there was no clear evidence that could actually prove it. Still, the defendant's entire record pointed in that direction, and this was taken to court to contribute to his conviction. The insistence on this version of the story by Klaus further irritated Marianne. who was now forced to see such allegations making headlines, which for her only helped to tarnish her daughter's image. According to her, Anna would never be capable of anything like that, and she was a happy and peaceful child. Despite the uncertainty, everything was heading towards a severe sentence for the defendant, even more so for the way he took the victim's life and his criminal history. Everyone already assumed that he would spend many years in jail for the crime he committed, but there was no time for this condemnation, and the trial ended in another way. In the midst of the large audience was also Marianne, who insisted on following the whole case closely. She was already tired of hearing Claus' claims that in addition to taking her daughter's life, he also continued to defame her. Marianne then decided to put an end to it. On March 6, 1981, the third day of Claus' trial, Marianne took a Beretta M1934 semi-automatic pistol with her to court. Because it was a compact weapon, she was able to easily hide it in her bag and go unnoticed by the guards. Once inside the courtroom, Marianne approached Claus from behind and fired 8 shots, which was the maximum capacity of the weapon. Of the 8 shots, 7 hit the defendant, who died on the spot. Shortly after Claus passed away, Marianne asked the guards if he was really lifeless. With the confirmation, she expressed relief and said, "I wanted to do it." It is almost certain that the crime was probably planned by the girl's mother. Marianne had prepared for days before the trial and organized all her steps to succeed in her plan. She did everything in a guarded way, so that the act was completely unexpected, surprising everyone who followed the case. According to police officers who were on duty at the court at the time of the incident, Marianne would have called Claus a pig and saw him fall into the ground. In her statement to the police, Marianne said she couldn't take the lies the defendant was telling all the time about her daughter and needed to do something about it. She also said, "He took my daughter's life. I wanted to shoot him in the face, but I shot him in the back, and I hoped he suffered." During her trial, Marianne said he had a dream in which he shot Claus, and also said that she had visions of her daughter in court. All of this had influenced her decision. A doctor who examined her said later she was asked for a sample of her handwriting, writing any sentence on a piece of paper they provided. She then wrote, "I did this for you, Anna," followed by 7 drawn hearts, which likely referred to her daughter's age, who was 7 years old at the time. She stated that the exact moment she decided to get up and put her plan into action was when Claus had asked for the floor to make one more statement. She then imagined that more lies would come about her daughter, and that made her go after him. On this, Marianne declared, "I thought, now comes the next lie about this victim who was my daughter." After Claus' death and Marianne's arrest, his entire life story and decision-making up to the act were sold and published by Stern Magazine, a famous German magazine, for about $158,000. According to reports, Marianne agreed to sell all kinds of information and the rights to use her story, so that she would have enough money for her legal expenses, such as hiring good lawyers. In addition to the magazine, several other media such as newspapers and TV channels covered the whole story in detail from that moment on. Marianne was tried and convicted of intentional murder. There was no consensus on whether the crime was premeditated or not, and given all the mitigating factors involved in the case, she was sentenced to 6 years in prison for the crime committed. The court decided that it couldn't view this case as an ordinary one, as the motives were quite different from any ordinary homicide. Marianne's conviction had international repercussions and divided the opinion of the German population. A research institute called the Alan Speck Institute gathered people's opinion on the case and showed that 27% of Germans judged the sentence to be too heavy, 55% considered the sentence too light, and 28% said it was an appropriate sentence size for the circumstances. Marianne began serving her sentence in 1983. Despite being sentenced to 6 years in prison, she served just under half of the sentence, being released with almost 3 years in prison in mid-1985. After leaving prison, she resumed her life normally. She moved to Nigeria with the aim of starting a new life away from Germany. There, she met a teacher who taught at a German camp. They started dating and got married shortly after. The marriage, however, didn't last long, and they divorced in 1990. After the marriage ended, she went to Sicily in Italy to spend some time there. Still in Sicily, she discovered pancreatic cancer. She then returned to Germany and began severe chemotherapy treatments in hopes of curing the disease. However, the disease progressed more and more, and because of that, she wanted to lead a calmer life and settle in one place. With little time left to live, she asked Lucas Boehmer, a reporter from the local newspaper, to document her final weeks. In September 1996, at the age of 46, Marianne Beckmeyer passed away in a hospital in the same city where her daughter died. She was buried in a grave next to her daughter in a cemetery in the city of Lübeck. The famous German media outlet NDR described the case as the most spectacular single-handed case in German post-war history. Marianne's entire story gained worldwide proportions, and she became known as the Mother of Vengeance. That was the story of Marianne Beckmeyer, the avenging mother who, instead of waiting for the decision of a conventional court system, decided to bring justice to her daughter into her own hands. Well, folks, that's it. Thank you so much for watching this far. Best wishes, and I see you next time.